All right, Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov. I wanted to take these last 2 weeks before we break for the high holidays to introduce you to another Chacham, a different Chacham, slightly different style, from a different perspective. In the words of our rabbis, En shnei nevi'im mitnabi'im b'signon echad. Two prophets can prophesy about the same thing, but they don't prophesy about the same thing in the same way. And here, I want to invoke another prophet with yet a similar message to the Chachamim that we've read until now, who says it slightly differently and explains it from a slightly different perspective. And I have to preface this with, I sometimes have a hard time. And I'll explain. I collect sources from everywhere. I have a rule. That is that I will learn Torah from everywhere, everyone, every place. As long as there is what is emet there, there's what is truth there, I will come and look for it. I'll take what I can take. I won't take what I can't take. Some people hope for, maybe not you, but there are definitely those that watch, they have their eyes set on us, and they hope for some purist, Sephardic Torah that fits a very specific agenda. And I'm not into being a purist of anything aside from emet. Asher natan lanu et Torato, Torat emet. He gave us his Torah, a Torah of truth. And I think the truth can be found everywhere, even in Batei Midrash that are not the same as ours, even from Talmidei Chachamim, that otherwise I wouldn't go looking in their books or in their teachings. In this particular instance, the rabbi that I'm about to introduce you to is a very, very special Talmid Chacham. And as special of a Talmid Chacham as he is, I also have a personal connection to him, which I'll share soon. But I also have some reservations, and the reservations are that is the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel. Rabbi Herzog was a little bit different than some of the other Chachamim that I usually introduce to this Beit Midrash. Even the style is a little different, the expectations are slightly different. But I ask from you to open your hearts and open your minds and accept divrei emet shenikarim, words of truth that are there and they're present, and they definitely must be considered and taken under advisement. Before I go any further, has anyone here ever heard of Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog, otherwise known as Rabbi Herzog from here on out? Yeah, can anyone share anything about him with us? Anything you know about him?
He grew up in Ireland, and I think he also wore a different kind of hat. And he wore like an Irish top hat too.
So he definitely is very famous for his get-up in which he wore a top hat. If you Google Rabbi Herzog, actually I might even have a picture for you. If you Google a picture of Rabbi Herzog, some of his more iconic images are with him in a top hat. That is absolutely correct. I mean, if I were to describe him, I don't know that's to be the first thing I would say, Yochanan, but I definitely accept that is. And I don't know how much you could see in these pictures. They're very small.
I think uniquely, from what I've read, he also was thinking about a new state with a halachic structure for its laws. Or at least he wrote about that.
Yes, very much. Very passionately, too. And I think that that's exactly why he is a perfect fit for introducing at this point in the Mishpat Tzedek. Right after the holidays, I want to jump into the writings of Rabbi Chaim David HaLevi as planned. I wanted to take these 2 weeks to address one more essay, and that is the early years of the State of Israel, just before the founding of the State of Israel, and how much more so right after the founding of the State of Israel. The conversation surrounding what type of legal system do we wish to see in Eretz Israel became a hot topic among all the people that were involved in the creation of the State of Israel. Rav Herzog, as the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of the State of Israel. So Rav Herzog replaced Harav Kook, but Rav Kook never saw the State of Israel. Harav Kook only saw the land of Israel, the chief rabbinate of Israel, but not actually the State of Israel. So Rav Herzog was the chief rabbi who transitioned the rabbinate from pre-State of Israel, post-State of Israel. A little bit about his biography. Rabbi Yitzchak HaLevi Herzog was the chief rabbi of Ireland, but how did he grow up? He was born in Lomzha in Russia. Russian Poland. So, as you know, the borders of the European countries change many times. And it's hard when you say a place to know exactly which nationality a person had or identified as. But he was born in Lomja to a Rabbi Yoel Leib Herzog. His father wrote a number of books on Torah and Shulchan Aruch a little bit, some Pesukim. Rabbi Herzog was instrumental in publishing some of those writings. He was born in 1888, and 10 years later, his father moved him to the United Kingdom, where he became a rabbi in the city of Leeds. In Leeds, that's where Rabbi Herzog went to school, and really he never studied his whole life in a yeshiva. So it's unique. There are certain Talmidei Chachamim who we find they never actually spent any significant amount of time in any particular rabbinic institution. Rabbi Herzog is one of those rabbis. There's a very famous, a very big Talmidei Chacham that I consult with regularly. And we were once laughing because someone told him, said, Rabbi, how could it be that you know so much Torah and you think so clearly and you articulate yourself so well when you never studied in any yeshiva? And he said, it's precisely because I never studied in a yeshiva that I'm able to do all of those things. So many yeshivot are there to homogenize people and make them think a certain way and talk a certain way and believe a certain way, learn Torah a certain way. He said, and Baruch Hashem, I never had the opportunity, sarcastically, to study in a yeshiva, which would do that to me. He studied mostly by his father. His father, after being a rabbi in Leeds, became a rabbi in Paris. Rabbi Herzog went on to attend the university in France, the Sorbonne, as well as a later age, the University of London. He kept receiving degrees after degrees after degrees. Perhaps most famously was his PhD, which made him Rabbi Dr. Isaac Herzog. The doctorate that he went for, he actually coined a whole new term in the study. In Hebrew, we just refer to it as the study of Kehillat. Harav Herzog was very involved in the revival of the blue string that would be part of the tzitzit, that was supposed to be part of our tzitzit, and that unfortunately throughout the years of exile disappeared from some people's tzitziot. Rav Herzog's study of the topic of Kehillat was not a halachic one purely. You see how much he knew about marine biology, you see how much he knew about history. In his PhD thesis, it actually became so important that it was recently published again by a few universities in Israel, not necessarily for the halachic content or the halachic value, but sometimes for the scientific value that was in his articles. Rabbi Herzog was very, very involved in the political life of every country he lived in. Famously and maybe infamously, when he was the rabbi in Dublin and then later the chief rabbi of Ireland, Rabbi Herzog was adamant that he stood on the behalf of the revolutionary fighters of Ireland. Some might consider terrorists, but that was Rabbi Herzog, and that's the side of history that he stood on. That led perfectly into becoming the chief rabbi of Israel at a time when the Jews were trying to overthrow the British as well. And that personality of being very politically involved did not escape his children. His son, famously, Chaim Herzog, was the 6th president of the state of Israel. And his grandson, Yitzchak, named after the grandfather, otherwise in Israel known as Bougie Herzog, is currently the president of the state of Israel right now. So from the chief rabbi to the 6th president to the current president of Israel, Rabbi Herzog's family was very and is very involved in the political life that was the state of Israel. In 1939, when the British put out the white paper. Familiar with the white paper? Okay, it's important for modern Zionist history. Rabbi Herzog led a procession throughout the streets of Jerusalem, in which he ended up finally at the steps of the Churva synagogue. Today they don't call it the Churva synagogue. What does Churva mean? Destroyed synagogue. Famously, this was the Chuvat Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. It was a synagogue of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, one of the great Ashkenazi rabbis who were in Jerusalem at that time. That synagogue was destroyed. For many, many years, all you saw of it in Jerusalem was the famous arch. You probably see old pictures. Remember that? You'd see it in like every iconic picture of the old city of Jerusalem. Today, thank God, they've rebuilt that synagogue, and they still call it the Churva synagogue, but it's kind of funny because it's not destroyed anymore. So today they try to push people to call it the Bet HaKnesset of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, but they still call it the Churva synagogue, which is, I guess, sometimes names stick. On the steps of the Churva synagogue, Rabbi Herzog took the white paper and he ripped it into two and said he will not accept. And this ripping up of papers became a hallmark of the Herzog family, because Chaim Herzog, his son, when he was then an ambassador to the UN, he ripped the UN resolution into two, which said that Zionism equaled racism, and he was echoing the footsteps of his father, who had done the same thing on the steps of the Churva synagogue. Second World War, Rabbi Herzog came to the United States. He made it a point to meet with President Roosevelt. Roosevelt didn't really take him seriously in terms of helping the Jews of Europe, which he tried very hard to get President Roosevelt to help the Jews in Europe. As you know, the policy of the American government at the time was not to divert from the war effort. It doesn't make sense for the Americans to care about the plight of the Jews that were in the concentration camps in Europe. According to legend, and I can't tell you that it's true, he took the last boat that crossed the Atlantic during the war. He missed the one that was eventually sunk in the Atlantic Ocean. And after the war, Rabbi Herzog spent a lot of time trying to bring back the Jewish children who were given to Christian orphanages throughout the Second World War. He wasn't always very successful, but he did meet with the Pope. There are different accounts. The Pope's office claims that it was a very wonderful meeting between him and the Pope. Other historians seem to remember that a little bit differently, getting a cold shoulder from the Pope. Nonetheless, HaLevi Herzog brought back 500 young Jewish children from those orphanages. There was even a train, a transport that was called the Herzog train, and he was very, very involved in all things related to Jewish activism and the state of Israel, aside from being a very special Talmid Chacham. Where did I meet the writings of Rabbi Herzog? When I was a young yeshiva student in Ner Israel in Baltimore, I was a little burned out from the method in which the Lithuanian yeshivot studied. You wake up in the morning, you go pray, you have some breakfast, and then from the minute you start studying until the minute you go to sleep, all that everyone studies, Talmud, 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 and that's it. And what I mean by Talmud, I don't mean Talmud in the regular methodology in which people should study Talmud, but a lot of pilpulim, a lot of what we spoke about in the last couple of weeks, this casuistry, comparing texts, contrasting texts, commentaries, arguing with each other. At a certain point, that wasn't my style of learning Torah. I mean, I should have had early signs then. But I would retreat at the end of a day, so our days ended somewhere closer to 10 o'clock at night. And I would find myself in the back of the Bet Midrash. There was a special section called the RBLY. I actually don't know what it stands for. It was the Sephardic library in Ner Israel, mostly donated by Persian Jews. And that's when I started dabbling in some halachic writings of Chacham Ovadia Yosef and the Ben Ish Chai, and that's when I really got myself involved in the writings of whatever Talmidei Chachamim were available to me. In the back of the ladies section of the yeshiva, which is right next to the RBLY, there was a library, and that library was sometimes closed, it was sometimes open. And in that library, there was a series of books that were arranged by alphabet, and I came across these blue books of Chief Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog. And there I saw maybe 10 or 12 volumes of the writings of Rabbi Herzog. You have to understand that in the yeshiva that I was in, to find writings from a chief rabbi of Israel was very rare. It's not the kind of yeshiva that holds any kind of teachings from chief rabbis of the state of Israel. Later in history, I discovered that the first Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Israel, Rabbi Ruderman, and Rabbi Herzog somehow were either classmates or were friends with each other. When Ner Israel founded their building, Rabbi Herzog came and he laid the cornerstone to the building. So there was some type of connection between that yeshiva and Rabbi Herzog. And for years, when I would want to study halachot and I wanted different opinions, I would consult with the writings of Rabbi Herzog. And for a very long time, I couldn't get my hands, after I left the yeshiva, I could not get my hands on the writings of Rabbi Herzog. And sometime last year, I'm talking to over 15 years of looking for the writings of Rabbi Herzog and not being able to get a whole set together, I finally completed my set of the writings of Rabbi Herzog. They're prominently in my shelf, in my dining room. And this particular series of books that we're about to open together is very unique because it's a 3-volume work in which Rabbi Herzog tries to suggest to the state of Israel, not just the Constitution, but how one can have a Jewish society which is democratic and also follows the Torah. He spent a significant amount of time dealing with modern issues in halakha. And if I have to tell you, from the rabbis who ever dealt with this issue, aside from Harav Uziel, and aside from Rabbi Chaim David HaLevi, you really have, on the Ashkenazi side of the equation, you have Rabbi Herzog, who shouldn't surprise you because he was the colleague of Harav Uziel, and Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, the Baal Tzitz Eliezer, who wrote a famous book called Hilchot Medina. Maybe you and I will get to it, maybe we won't. Rabbi Waldenberg also shouldn't surprise you, because he was the secretary for a long time and later the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva of Rabbi Uziel, which means that he was contemporaries with Rav Chaim David HaLevi. And really, thanks to Rabbi Waldenberg that we have any of the writings of Uziel. He kept them safe. And so you have these few minds, not very many, who sat down in a mature fashion and dealt with what does a modern state of Israel that is influenced and impacted by the Torah, yet not willing to give up on its democratic nature, what does it look like? How do we deal with issues that obviously we're uncomfortable with? And in these volumes, Rabbi Herzog has an essay, which I want to take apart with you between now and Rosh Hashanah. But for now, let's start at the top. Why do we have to run ahead of ourselves? I recommend, if I can, 2 books about the life of Rabbi Herzog. First, in English, there's a book called The Rabbinate in Stormy Days, The Life and Teachings of Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog, the first chief rabbi of Israel. I think you can get this on Amazon, but if you Google it, you might be able to find it. It's quite a large volume, and it has a tremendous amount of pictures in it. So if you care about history and how things looked and different personalities of that era, you'll find it here. There is a second volume that I only know exists in Hebrew. I don't know that one exists in English. But this volume, and it doesn't have any fancy cover on it, is called HaRabbanit, or The Rabbanit. And this book is entirely about Rabbanit Sarah Herzog. I don't know if you can see her. But that was the wife of Rabbi Herzog, who was quite a special personality in her own right. And if you and I get a chance to discuss more about her, perhaps we will. There's a famous, famous picture of them together. If I could pull it up quickly, and if I can't. If you search her on your internet browser, you may come up with a nice picture of her and Rabbi Herzog. It was a very special lady, and there's an entire book dedicated to her. It was printed by the National Religious Women's Organization in Israel called Emunah. I have no idea if it's still in print, but I have a volume of this book, and I keep it close to me because it always is a special thing for me when the Rabbaniot of great Torah scholars were special scholars in their own right and did incredible things in their own right. And it's part of a dream of mine to empower other ladies to recognize that the Jewish world requires their leadership also. And that leadership that comes from all of us will do a lot of good for the whole Jewish people. If you want a book of Rabbi Herzog's teachings in English, you can probably find yourself a volume of Judaism, Law, and Ethics by the late Chief Rabbi Isaac Herzog, selected by his son, Rabbi Chaim Herzog. We're going to read an introduction from here. There are a few other volumes of his writings translated to English. They're not so easy to find, but if you find them, you may enjoy what you find in there. Let's check out the PDF that's attached to your Zoom invitation. If there's any questions or comments about anything I said until now, I'd be more than happy to address them. This book is a 3-part book, which is titled Techukah LiYisrael Al Pi HaTorah. It's hard for me to differentiate for you. There's Chok and Techukah and Chukah, but let's say a legal system for the Jewish people according to the Torah. The first volume deals entirely with the issues of Sidrei Shilton u'Mishpat b'Medina Yehudit, how law, government, and court systems look like in a Jewish country. Met Maran HaGaon Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog, written by Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog, Zichrono Livracha, and published both by Mosad HaRav Kook and Yad HaRav Herzog in Jerusalem. I thought that if we can have someone introduce us to Rabbi Herzog, best it would be his son, President Chaim Herzog. And so if you look on page I don't know which page it is of your PDF, maybe page 4. You'll find Divrei Hakdama La'osef Ktavav Shel Rav Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog. It should say the letter Tet at the bottom of the page. Do you see that? Can someone tell me what number in the PDF pages that is? 3. Okay, so on page 3. This is written by President Chaim Herzog. Avi, my father, Harav Yitzchak Isaac HaLevi Herzog Zatzal, Gilem Bechovo Gam Talmud Torah, V'gam Chochmat HaOlam, combined the study of Torah wisdom and worldly wisdom, Ad Shaya LaTofa'a Miyuchedet Umkorit, Hen Bechogei Lomdei HaTorah, V'hen Bechogei HaMadah. And he became a very unique species, a very original personality, both in the realm of Torah and in the realm of the sciences. You can imagine that not every academia or institution of higher learning saw inside of it chief rabbis. And you can imagine that not all chief rabbis were used to hanging out with academics. And every side that he was in equally respected and suspected him. In fact, you should know that when Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook died, Harav Kook always wanted Rabbi Herzog to make Aliyah. He was a big fan of the combination of both rabbi, doctor, and wanted him to come to Israel. Unfortunately, Rabbi Herzog only took over. He left Ireland for Israel only after Harav Kook passed away. Many people, there were voices in the rabbinic community that didn't want a rabbi doctor to be the chief rabbi of Israel. They viewed that combination to be dangerous or heretical somehow. Rabbi doctors, is he really a rabbi? Is he really a doctor? What is he really? And if you remember, when we were reading last week from the Rosh was the one who told us that somebody who has studied the sciences can't possibly study the Torah properly. That attitude still exists in the Jewish community, and Rav Herzog becoming the chief rabbi was no simple feat. Mibchina zo haya yachid bedoro. In this way, he was an individual, very unique in his generation. You can almost call Rabbi Herzog a unicorn in that regard. Me'olam lo lamad b'yeshiva. He never studied in a yeshiva. Ele bebet aviv harav. He only studied at the home of his father. Tchila belomza shebepolin, velachar miken beleeds shebeanglia, ubeparis shebetzorfat. From Poland to England to France. Bechol shalosh ha'arim ha'ele kihen aviv, harav Yoel HaLevi Herzog, kerav u'manhig ruchani. His father, Yoel HaLevi Herzog, Rabbi Yoel HaLevi Herzog, was the chief rabbi in all of these places. Begin 16. At the age of 16, Haya Baki b'Talmud HaBavli Kulo. Rabbi Herzog, Jr., our Rabbi Herzog, was an expert in the whole Babylonian Talmud. The English version of this introduction that is attached 2 pages later, I copied from the English book of Chaim Herzog. It's almost the same, but it's not identical. And if you want to follow along in the English, you're more than welcome to do that. את ההסמכה לרבנות קיבל מידי אחד מגדולי וגאוני הדור הרידב"ז. He received his rabbinic ordination from one of the famous rabbis of the generation, an Ashkenazi rabbi, the Riddbaz, not to be confused with one with a similar name who was a Sephardic rabbi. Liyamim hukar ke'echad migdolei HaTorah. Eventually he became known as one of the giants of Torah, bifkiyut, be'amkut, uvepsika, in the breadth, in the depth, and also in his ability to render halachic judgments. Harambam, Maimonides, haya b'shvilo lo rak moreh nevuchim, asher betorato v'ktavav ha'imik. He wasn't only his guide to the matters perplexed, but also in his writings, in his Torah, he was very involved in. Kim gam demut asher ha'ira lo darko b'chaim. But in general, the Rambam was a personality that guided Rabbi Herzog. V'achen, and therefore, shilev betocho lo rak gadlut b'Torah, kim b'kiyut b'chokhmat hagoyim. Not only did Rabbi Herzog feel it was important for him to become an expert in the study of the sciences of the Torah, but also in the study of the wisdom of the non-Jews as well. He was very well versed in a number of disciplines: mathematics, safot klasiot v'shemiot, classic and Semitic languages, philosophia, umada, philosophy and science. Hu yada 12 leshonot. He spoke 12 languages fluently. This is a boy who grew up in Poland, Polish Russia, or Russian Poland. I remember what I told you before. Rabbi Herzog, by the time he becomes the chief rabbi of Ireland, is so familiar with that language that he almost gets nicknamed as the Irish rabbi. People viewed him as such. חיבורו לשם קבלת התואר דוקטור באוניברסיטת לונדון על התכלת בישראל הקדומה, חושף ידע עמוק בביולוגיה ימית. If you analyze his PhD dissertation that he filed in the University of London, you can see an incredible understanding of marine biology. בשל חשיבותה המדעית של העבודה הזאת, היא פורסמה מחדש לפני שנתיים על ידי אוניברסיטת חיפה והאוניברסיטה העברית. Oh, that's good. That's what I told you. That because of its scientific value, it was republished by the Haifa University as well as the Hebrew University just recently. ספריו בשפה האנגלית על החוק היהודי, שרק 2 מ-5 כרחיו הוא הספיק להוציא לאור, מציגה אותו כבן בית גם בחוק הרומי ובחוק האנגלי. He managed to publish 2 of his 5 volumes that he wrote in English. So not writings that were translated into English, but Jewish legal writings that he wrote in English himself. 2 of the 5 volumes were published. In fact, just today I was speaking to Rabbi Yosef Zernigan of Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. He just came across those 2 volumes in his library. I've wanted those 2 volumes for a while. They're a little bit out of my price range, but these writings of Rabbi Herzog, you see, it's one thing when you translate a rabbi's writing, but when the rabbi is an English speaker, and he's able to write in English sophisticated ideas of Torah, you get a very unique combination that you don't usually find until our generation. Some other chachamim that you might not have expected to write in English, I don't know if you've heard of Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, the rabbi of Amsterdam, the rabbi of Bernard Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza. He was a Jew who ran away, his family ran away from the Inquisition, and he also wrote a famous letter to Oliver Cromwell in English. He wrote books in Spanish, books in Portuguese, books in Hebrew. We had some very special scholars in our history. You know, when you talk about founding a Sanhedrin and needing to find Torah scholars who have all these values and all these wisdoms and all this knowledge, Rabbi Herzog could have been a fantastic candidate. I just wonder which of our yeshivot, like we mentioned last week, are putting out people like Rabbi Herzog. It's precisely why it was important to mention that he didn't study anywhere, because had he studied somewhere, he may have never reached this level of scholarship. בתקופת תקומת עם ישראל בארץ ישראל, ולאחר מכן במדינת ישראל, נודעה חשיבות יתר לסמכות הפסיקתית של הרבנות הראשית, ובמיוחד לעומד בראש מוסד נעלה זה. At the beginning of the history of the state of Israel, there were tremendous expectations and respect for the chief rabbinate of Israel. Everyone recognized the value that a chief rabbinate had to offer. So if today I tell you that I'd be grateful if the chief rabbinate disappeared, but at that time in history, the chief rabbinate could have been one of the most incredible organizations that existed. In fact, later he's going to mention one of his friends, Rabbi Herzog's friends, was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Leib Fishman Maimon. Have you heard of him? Some of you in my San Diego classes will have heard of him because he's one of my favorite Ashkenazi rabbis in modern history. Rabbi Yehuda Leib Fishman Maimon, if you ever see David Ben-Gurion in the Declaration of the Independence of the State of Israel, right next to him is Rabbi Maimon. He was the first minister of religion of the State of Israel. He was a student of the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi HaLevi Epstein. He was one of the main advocates of founding a Sanhedrin. When he opened up the chief rabbinate offices in Jerusalem, there's a famous telegram. One of the rabbis in Jerusalem, the Brisker Rav, didn't like that he was going to establish a chief rabbinate. He felt that it was trying to start a Sanhedrin before the times of the Mashiach, and Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon dismissed him quite matter-of-factly, dismissed the concerns about the Brisker Rav. And 4 of the big rabbis in America got together and wrote a telegram protesting the chief rabbinate of Israel, and particularly Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon, for even dreaming of speaking against the Brisker Rav. It's an interesting time in history. But at that point in time, the chief rabbinate could have been the precursor for some great institution of Judaism. And from his writings in English, you could see just how much he understood the Roman and English legal systems. ומעל הכל, נכונותם של רבנים לפסוק על פי ההלכה בבעיות הרבות שהתעוררו בכל שטחי החיים was very important for these rabbis to deal with issues that were coming up in the modern state of Israel. Avi Zal, my father, blessed memory, ראה לנגד עיניו תמיד את צורכי העם. He always saw the needs of the people. הזמן, the time והמדינה, and the needs of the country. אוצר הפסקים והתשובות שהוא הותיר מאחוריו מעיד על גדלותו בתורה. הבנתו את בעיות השעה ובעיות העם. we see from the writings that Rabbi Herzog left behind how much he understood and cared about the problems that faced the modern Jewish people. דאגתו לפרט ונכונותו להפעיל את ההלכה תוך שימוש בסמכותו הבלתי מעוררת כגדול בתורה על מנת לקרב את הלבבות. He was not afraid to deal with issues, grab them by the horns, and to help use his halachic status as a giant of Torah to solve problems and bring people together. ללוות את צורכי חיי המדינה ולשמור בקנאות ובגאווה על מקומה הגאה של הרבנות במדינה. He was interested in helping in any way the development of the state of Israel while maintaining zealously the status of the chief rabbinate of Israel and the need for a halachic authority in the state of Israel. Chaim Herzog continues, כמי שהייתה לו הזכות ההיסטורית לכהן כראש הרבנים של מדינת ישראל בתקומתה, and just as he was the rabbi who had the historic privilege of being the chief rabbi of Israel at the founding of the state of Israel, כתב הצעה יסודית ביחס לחוקה בישראל על בסיס ההלכה. He developed a law that he wished to enter into the legal system of the state of Israel to found Jewish law as the foundation of Israeli law. הצעה מבוססת על בקיאות בתורה וידיעה עמוקה של חוקי העמים הנהוגים בעולם. And this whole presentation of Rabbi Herzog comes not just from a thorough understanding of halakha, but a thorough understanding of law in general and how the world expects the legal system to function. פסקי דין שלו בתוקף היותו נשיא בית הדין הרבני העליון לערעורים מפרשים את ההלכה על פיצוחי החיים המודרניים ומוכיחים את חיונות ההלכה וחוקי ישראל גם בעת החדשה. If you analyze the legal proceedings that came before him as a judge when he was the head of the Bedin, the rabbinic Supreme Court in Jerusalem, you can see that he took such care not just of halakha, but how to apply halakha to modern life. פסקיו מחזקים את כל אלה. His halachic rulings strengthen all those, listen to the sentence, אשר מאמינים who believe, כי התהליך חיוני ואפשרי, that this process of making Israel a Jewish country that follows halakha is possible, not just necessary, but is possible. תשובותיו לשאלות שיפנו אליו רבנים מכל קצות תבל הם אוצר בלום. If you look at his writings, you could see the questions that all rabbis from around the world asked him. שיעוריו השבועיים בהלכה היו משיכה לגדולי התורה בישראל. His weekly halakha classes became headquarters for Jews, rabbis, Torah scholars, to come and hear his words of Torah. I should tell you, it's not so simple to find a chief rabbi of Israel that actual Talmidei Chachamim would come listen to, especially not among the Ashkenazi chief rabbis of Israel. For whatever it was, the attitude towards the Ashkenazi chief rabbis of Israel usually was very negative, not scholars, not Talmidei Chachamim, not poskei halachot. If I could tell you some of the people that used to come to the classes of Rabbi Herzog, let me read you their names. I have wrote them down. Some of the students that came to his halacha classes, Rabbi Herzog, were already rabbis. That he would host this class at the home of his father-in-law, Rabbi Hillman, Rabbi Isher Zalman Meltzer, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tukachinsky, Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rabbi Shlomo Goren, later the chief rabbi of Israel, but also the chief rabbi of the Israeli army, Harav Yosef Shalom Eliashiv, the famous Rabbi Eliashiv, Rabbi Avraham Shapira, and Rabbi Betzalel Zolti, who was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. He was known to be quite a zealot. Harav Peretz has one simicha from Rabbi Betzalel Zolti. These were some of the people that came to study Torah from Rabbi Herzog. He was recognized as a very unique Talmid Chacham. In fact, when he died, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef said about him that he was a leader of the Jewish people. Ahav tzedek v'sana resha. He loved righteousness and he hated evil. And Rabbi Herzog was known for some pretty incredible things as a leader of the Jewish people. Perhaps if there's one last sentence I could read here. Achen, hitim lo hakinui Sar HaTorah. It was very befitting, said Chaim Herzog, that my father was called the Prince of the Torah. Ki hu haya sar b'Yisrael, because he was a prince of the Jewish people. V'gadol b'Torah, and also a giant of the Torah. Ish shaked ve'anav zeh, this humble, quiet, modest man. Anak b'shitcho, מצא עצמו במרכז האירועים ההיסטוריים בימי המאבק בארץ. He finds himself at the center of all that is happening in the state of Israel. בימי השואה וההצלה, in the days of the Holocaust and the ones after it. בימי תקומת מדינת ישראל, and the days in which we already established the state of Israel. Rabbi Herzog finds himself as the chief rabbi of the first modern Jewish state in 2,000 years. And burning in his mind is only one question. How do I make the state of Israel a Jewish state of Israel? And that's what we're going to begin discussing tonight. We're going to finish that next week, before we break for the Chagim. With your permission, if we can turn to the next page here. It says Pticha and it has a little asterisk. It should say page 1 at the bottom. Yes? Page 5 in your PDF? Okay, listen to what Herzog says. Ha'avodah hazot, this job, shehutla alai, that was placed on me, על ידי אסיפת המועצה המורחבת של הרבנות הראשית לארץ ישראל, by the expanded division of rabbis of the chief rabbinate of the state of Israel, חשובה וקשה היא כאחת, is both important and difficult. Can you imagine being the first chief rabbi of Israel? All the questions the Jewish people had for 2,000 years on what is it going to look like when we have a Jewish country fall on your shoulders. There is no rabbi you consult with. There is no Rosh HaYeshiva you can delegate to. There is no other chief. You are the address for all the modern Jewish questions. It fell on his shoulders. He had to deal with this issue. אין אני מתברך בלבבי שכבר הצלחתי לפתור את כל הבעיות. I cannot bless myself and say, I have solved all of the problems. שקיימת אפשרות ליצור תחוקה למדינה יהודית. כשהאמת היא שעד כדי כך לא נתכוונתי, because I didn't even plan to solve all the problems. המטרה העיקרית שלי, my main purpose in all my writings, הייתה להראות, to show people שקיימת אפשרות ליצור תחוקה למדינה יהודית, that it's possible for us to create a legal system for a Jewish country, ולכונן בה משטר משפטי, and to create in it a system of police and law, שלא יהיה בשום פרט בניגוד לתורתנו הקדושה. We could create a modern state of Israel that will preserve modern legal systems and will not contradict our Torah at all. כדאי לדעתי להתאמץ בכל הכוחות לשם מטרה זו. In my opinion, it is worthwhile to involve ourselves in this matter with all of our strength. כי אם חס ושלום, because of God forbid, נתרפא במלאכת שמיים זו, if we are lazy and don't deal with this divine endeavor, בעת ההכרעה הזאת, at this pivotal moment in Jewish history, חס ושלום, heaven forbid, שהרוב הגדול של היישוב יתייאש חס ושלום מן התורה. What will happen is that the majority of the Jewish people living in Israel will give up hope in the Torah. ויאמץ לו לבלי להתחשב עם תורת קודשנו. And they will adopt for themselves without thinking about the Torah. שורש נשמתנו, the root of our soul. איזו תחוקה גויית מודרנית מן המוכן. If the Jewish people don't have a modern version of the ancient Torah to adopt as their legal system, then they will adopt one of the many non-Jewish modern legal systems that are available to them in the world. Rav Herzog is trying to deal with this before the founding of a state of Israel. He says, if I don't manage to put together a coherent legal system that fits in the modern life, that is based off of the Torah of the Jewish people, ultimately the Jewish state will be established and they will choose one of the already ready legal systems that are on the shelf. ואיזה ספר משפטים וחוקים שוויצרי או אחר, they'll borrow from themselves some Swiss legal system or some other European system, וזה כבר בעצמו יהיה הרס פנימי גמור. This will become an internal destruction of the Jewish people, internal. ruchani, spiritually, dati, religiously, historically, v'chilul gadol k'lapei chutz, and it will be a desecration towards the rest of the world who will watch the first modern Jewish state of Israel after 2,000 years adopt a non-Jewish legal system as their guide. דומני שמספיק להגיד את הדברים החמורים הללו מבלי לתת להם פירוש. He said, I feel that it's okay if I don't expand on this any further. And if I say them, you can already understand on your own. יהי רצון may be Hashem's will. שתשרה שכינה במעשה ידינו. That the Shekhinah should rest in my handiwork. ואור התורה יאיר את ליבם של כל אחינו בארץ ובתפוצות. And the light of the Torah should shine in the hearts of all our brethren, both in Israel and in the diaspora. ונזכה במהרה למדינה היהודית השלמה אשר התחלת דגאולה. And we may merit soon to see a Jewish state of Israel that follows the Torah, and it will be the beginning of our redemption. ברוח התורה, in the spirit of the Torah. בנויה על יסודותיה, which is based on its foundations. ומכאן לגאולה שלמה, amen ואמן. And from here to there we will reach the final redemption, amen ואמן. This speech was given on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, 25 days before Chanukah of 1947. Which means that in May of 1948, not even 6 months later, the state of Israel was established. As we're going to see later in time, Rav Herzog does not finish writing this book in time for the state of Israel to be established. And he regrets that forever. Nonetheless, he didn't stop writing, he didn't stop sharing, he didn't stop teaching, and with your permission, I would like to begin the essay of Rabbi Herzog, which is titled, and it's just the next page in your PDF, even though it's a completely different page. In my book, page 210, appendix 6 of the first volume of this volume of Rabbi Herzog. Al Mishpat HaTorah b'Yisrael, on the legal system of the Torah in the modern country of Israel. This article was written in the summer of 1948. So if he gave the speech we just read, or the introduction we just read, in the winter of 1947, a few months later, in May, was the establishment of the State of Israel, and a few months later, you're either in June, July, August of 1948, Rabbi Herzog writes this article. It's the fledgling State of Israel. It's just barely alive. Rabbi Herzog is the chief rabbi, and he writes the following words. Are you with me? It says 210 at the bottom. Let's read a little bit, so that next week we're not starting all over again, and we'll finish the bulk of this next week, B'ezrat Hashem. Medinat Yisrael, the State of Israel, העמידה לפנינו בעיות קשות, has placed before us very difficult problems. הדורשות עיון ובירור מצד חכמי התורה, which require serious thought and introspection on the part of the Torah scholars of the Jewish people. By the way, some of the issues Rav Herzog writes about in this book, some of the letters that he exchanges with rabbis like Rabbi Uziel, are about topics. I'll share with you some of the topics. The position of women in a Jewish government, not just in terms of political leadership, testimony in court. How long can a modern country survive if women are not able to testify in front of a court of law, seemingly as halakha wants? The status of non-Jews in a Jewish country as politicians, as lawmakers, as dayanim or shoftim on courts, the testimony of citizens of the State of Israel who are not Jewish. What is the status of that? Issues relating to, in general, church and state and how to deal with many of the conflicts that arise from there. How to deal with religious coercion. How does a government have a religious value such as closing things on Shabbat, providing kosher food to the public, while not taking away the ability for the minorities to do whatever they want in their personal lives? Issues that I'm not sure the Jewish community has really ever resolved. We had Chachamim start some of these issues, but have they truly finished some of these issues? There are new problems. That for the last 2,000 years, it was okay that they were theoretical. But they're not theoretical anymore. Now they're real. What are you going to do with them? I was one of the rabbis who was excited about the prospect of a state of Israel, unlike some of his colleagues. Many, if not most, of the Ashkenazi contemporaries of Rabbi Herzog were antagonistic towards the idea of the founding of a state of Israel. Rabbi Herzog says, I'm complaining about the problems not because I'm an anti-Zionist. To the contrary, I wanted the state of Israel. I already made up my mind. I reached the conclusion. That the Jewish state, having a Jewish state, is a fundamental need for the Jewish people. Not just from the perspective of saving Jewish people. The survivors, our brethren who are survivors of what happened, the devastating tragedies of Europe. And not only from the perspective of creating a safe haven for our brothers and sisters that came from the Islamic countries, the Middle East, that the religious zealots were making their lives miserable, like Yemen and Iraq. So I'm not only a fan of having a state of Israel, I wasn't a supporter of the Zionist idea only because it was a good way to save Jewish people. לא רק מן הבחינה ההיסטורית הלאומית של השאיפה לפריקת עול הגלות, and not purely from the perspective, the political perspective of freeing ourselves from exile of other nations ruling over us. לא רק כדי לסלק את הסכנה של השמדת ישראל חס ושלום המאיימת תמיד. I didn't only support the idea of a state of Israel because that would be a way to save the Jewish people from being eradicated and destroyed like people are always trying to do throughout history. לא רק כדי להכין מקלט ליצרה. I didn't only support the state of Israel because it was a way to create a safe haven for Jewish people who, whenever they would need to go, whichever country they would run away from, they would know there's a Jewish country they could run to. לא רק מהבחינה של קלות הנפש היהודית אל חירות ישראל. חירות ממש. פנימית וחיצונית כאחד. And not just from the yearning, the desire of the Jewish people to have internal and external freedom. בליבי נקבעה הדעה, in my heart, I already reached the conclusion, the opinion, שזהו דבר שהיהדות עצמה, בתוך תוכה, that the Judaism itself, in its inner depths, היהדות מהבחינה הכי עמוקה, הרוחנית הנשמתית, that the Judaism, not the Jewish people, the Torah itself, in the heart and the soul of the Torah, זקוקה אליו במאוד מאוד, requires the state of Israel to exist. Did you hear what I just read? Rabbi Herzog is going out on a limb here. Rabbi Herzog is saying it's not just the Jewish people who need an autonomous country as their homeland. Judaism itself, the soul of Judaism, the Torah itself, needs the Jewish people to have an independent homeland. It was clear to me like the sun is clear in the afternoon. That the terrible Holocaust, that destroyed most of our nation, with all of its geniuses, rabbaneha, its rabbis, tzadikeha, the righteous ones, chachameha v'sofreha, its scholars and its authors, mishorereha v'askaneha, its poets and its activists and business people. Garma tezuza azali sidot ha'emunah. The devastation of the Holocaust created not just dead Jews, but it created the death of emunah inside of Jews. Our faith was shaken up. Hatmunim amok amok, belev hamonei bet Yisrael ba'olam kulo. Jews all over the world were impacted in their faith because of the devastation of the Holocaust. Pachod pachadati. פחדתי. שים השחר שהתחיל לעלות בארץ האבות והנביאים יתעלם ויסתתר חס ושלום מזמן ארוך. And I was afraid that as the dawn began rising in the land of our forefathers and prophets, תהיינה התוצאות מרות מאוד. I was afraid that the result of what would happen if we allowed this to continue would be so bitter. עד כדי לסכן את עצם קיום היהדות על כל פנים בגולה. I was afraid that without a state of Israel, Judaism itself might cease to exist, especially outside of the land of Israel. In the year 2023, we don't always appreciate what it means that there is a state of Israel. A state of Israel you can complain about, a prime minister of Israel that you can decide to love or hate, a government of Israel that you can criticize or be angry about or be happy with. The fact that such a thing exists did something tremendous to the Jewish people around the world. I read a story once, I don't remember who. There was a famous Talmid Chacham. He once was traveling in South America. They said he came to a Bet HaKnesset on Yom Kippurim. And the Bet HaKnesset was full. It was full. There was not standing room only. And he asked the Gabayin, it's incredible. I never knew this could. The Bet HaKnesset is full in this country. We know there's not even enough religious Jews here to have kosher food. And he said, you don't understand. Ever since the founding of the State of Israel, the Bet HaKnesset has been packed every single Shabbat. There's no room for movement. Jews who decided to abandon their Judaism, all of a sudden, because of the mere existence of a Jewish state, have reclaimed their Judaism. Yet we talk so much about Jews who abandon their Judaism because of the Zionist movement, because we talk a lot about that. But we don't talk about the chizuk, the strength that the existence of the State of Israel gave and gives so many Jews until today. I'm sure you know, or those of you who have known me long enough, that my Zionism is very different than whatever Zionism is peddled out there in the streets. I'm allergic to anti-Zionism in its rabidly religious sense of hating the concept of Jewish people fighting for themselves and building their own future. I'm equally allergic to the messianic religious Zionism that is found in most religious Zionist circles. I'm equally allergic to that type of Zionism. There's a very moderate Zionism of our Chachamim that exists and is almost unknown. One that is able to say, we can and will criticize the State of Israel, and we also will understand it to be the most significant event that happened in modern Jewish history. Rav Herzog is a member of this camp. Ulefichach, and therefore, בשלה אצלי הכרה מוצקת שהמאמצים להצלחת מאבקנו ההירואי בארץ ישראל, and it became clear to me that our heroic work, our heroic accomplishments or struggles in Eretz Israel to establish independence, henam davar shnishmat ha'umah teluya bo, is something that the soul of our people depends on. שאין זו רק מלחמה לעזרת ישראל מצד הצר הצורר. It's not only something which will exist in order to save the Jewish people from the hands of those who hate us. Someone familiar with the Rambam's laws of war? Anyone here study Rambam's laws of war? There are two types of war that Jewish people go into. Milchemet mitzvah, milchemet reshut. A mitzvah war and an optional war. Can someone define those for me?
Milchemet mitzvah is when you have to defend yourself. Milchemet reshut if you want to extend the borders of Israel.
Very good. The Rambam tells us that Milchemet Mitzvah, there's a few definitions of Milchemet Mitzvah. For example, fighting Amalek, fighting the 7 nations that we have to come to Israel, but most those wars are already mostly behind us. The most common definition of Milchemet Mitzvah, is what Rachel mentioned, is to save the Jewish people from the hands of those that are coming to kill them. Milchemet Reshut is an optional war. David HaMelech decides he wants to expand the borders of the State of Israel. He wants to wage war against the country next to him. He's allowed to. He's allowed to. But that's not a Milchemet Mitzvah. The difference between Milchemet Mitzvah and Milchemet Reshut, anyone know any of the differences? They're not the same wars.
Well,
The requirement to go out to war.
Right, the requirement of drafting people to war. Even a chatan from his chuppah we take to a Milchemet Mitzvah. Even the people who study Torah, everyone goes to a Milchemet Mitzvah. Rabbi Herzog says, the wars that we're fighting, hi Milchemet Mitzvah beli safek. It's a mitzvah war if there ever was one. Defending the Jewish people from the hand of the nations around us that are trying to wipe us off the map. qualifies in its most legal definition as milchemet mitzvah. She'en lo rak milchemet hatzalat gufanit. It's not only a war that is there to protect our bodies, to save our bodies. Eli yoter mizeh. I've reached the conclusion that more than that. Milchama latzalat nishmat ha'umah. The wars that the soldiers of Israel are fighting heroically is a war to save the soul of the Jewish people. Yachad im zot. But together with this, hirgashti, I felt, שהמדינה תעמיד אותנו בפני בעיות פנימיות קשות ומסובכות. I felt that the new state of Israel is going to place before us new obstacles, new problems, very difficult ones, complicated ones. אבל לא נרתעתי מפני כך, but I was not afraid because of this. נתקיים בי fulfilled in me the words of our prophets. Ufachad v'rachav levavech, I think is the nikud here. The prophet says, pachad v'rochav, rachav, gam yachad. Forgive me, I didn't check the Navi. I'm almost positive this is the nikud. What does it mean? To have anxiety and joy at the same time. Just as I am anxious about the problems that the state of Israel is going to place before us, I am equally excited that these are the problems we have to deal with. These should be our problems. What is a Jewish state going to look like? Is so much of a better problem than what are we going to do with Hanukkah candles in the middle of Auschwitz? That's a fantastic question. It's a fantastic problem to have. It's a real problem though. Don't think for 1 minute that the problems the state of Israel came to solve didn't bring with it new problems that we never had to contend with for the last 2,000 years. למרות הבעיות הקשות, despite the terrible problems that will arise. ולמרות המאבקים הפנימיים הממושכים שאנו עומדים בפניהם. And even though I know that some of these problems are not going to be solved overnight, there are major problems in the modern state of Israel. Huge problems. אני עומד בדעתי והשקפתי. I still stand strong on what I believe. I stand firm. אני מאמין. I believe שסוף סוף, that ultimately, אחרי מאבקים שונים במשך תקופה ידועה, that after we struggle against each other for a prolonged amount of time, it cannot tell us how long, הכל בעזרת השם יהיה בסדר. Everything will ultimately be all right. It's going to be all right. Rav Herzog tells us the state of Israel introduced into our lives new problems that we have not had to contend with for 2,000 years. Rabotai, I told you that I don't deal with politics, but have you been watching the news out of Israel the last year? Have you been watching, not talking to you about terrorism, and I'm not talking to you about war, and I'm talking about internal conflict in the Jewish people, without taking any sides in that conflict. Only a fool will not recognize that the divides, not one divide, the divides that exist in Israeli society and translates therefore into the Jewish community around the world, those divides run very deep. It's 75 years of problems that no one has dealt with. Rav Herzog says you can't pretend those problems don't exist. They do exist, and we don't know how long they will exist for. Of one thing I am certain, says Rabbi Herzog, that it's all going to be all right. Everything will be okay, B'ezrat Hashem. We'll struggle. We'll continue struggling. But at some point, things will work out. I don't want to continue this paragraph because this paragraph is going to introduce us to the rest of Rabbi Herzog's essay. Rabbi Herzog is going to identify 5 major problems that Israeli society needs to figure out how to deal with. And from those 5, we're not going to deal with all of them. We're going to deal with one. And that one is Mishpat Tzedek. How do we convince a society of people who may be so far removed from the values of our Torah? Or how do we convince people that so much love the Torah but are afraid of the seeming values of the Torah because they think it might ruin their life? How do we show them that there is an alternative? There is a Torah, a Mishpat Tzedek that is relevant to the Jewish people today, all Jewish people, across all the backgrounds and all the stripes and all the flavors. Says Rav Herzog, that's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require work on behalf not just of Torah scholars, but of the people. To be willing to talk and to discuss and to write and to share. And sometimes to be willing to think about Jewish law differently than we have been for 2,000 years. It's a Pandora's box. I think that's the phrase. You can open this up, but you don't know what comes out. You're not sure what's going to happen once you open this can of worms. There are problems though, and those problems will not go away by hiding our heads in the sand. That's not usually how problems go away. The problems only get worse. And if anything, if Rav Herzog wrote these words in the summer of 1948, we're in the summer of the year 2023, 75 years later. And Rav Herzog's ideas are just as relevant to us today than they were then. And perhaps I can summarize. My plan for finishing up this summer semester in Mishpat Tzedek in Shiviti, New York, and then my plan of what we're going to do in the fall and winter. I want to finish with you this essay of Rav Herzog next week. B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach. We're going to spend our time going through it. We're going to take a break for the holidays because that's what we have to do. I know that some of us have been sitting on some ideas. As much as we love this idea of Mishpat Tzedek, we keep coming back to certain questions like, okay, but what does it actually look like? If I want to have a Jewish country, but what is my life going to be like? Are they going to stone me in the street if I, by accident, turn my lights on Shabbat? We're afraid. You're allowed to be afraid. That's the point. We're talking about scary things here. We're talking about very intense Jewish issues. And before I can jump with you into the laws of the Sanhedrin, I must do with you one more fundamental piece from Rabbi Chaim David HaLevi, which I will introduce to you, B'ezrat Hashem, in the weeks right after Sukkot. We'll sit together on two essays that were written by Rabbi Chaim David HaLevi, and that will be a perfect segue for us to crack open the volumes of the Rambam's book of the laws of Sanhedrin with the commentary of Rabbi Chaim David HaLevi, and so many of the pieces that we've been trying to introduce here, and the different, there are a lot of moving pieces that we want to bring together. I'm certain that all of those will happen together. At a certain point, I plan to be in New York again with my wife for one of those in-person classes. I don't yet have a date for that. But B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach, all I can tell you is that we have one more Sunday class together before the high holidays. And one thing that I can say is that it's been a tremendous zechut this summer to be learning with you something that I've never had the courage, I would say audacity. It doesn't require audacity. Audacious, Baruch Hashem, I was born like that. But courage, I wasn't born with a lot of courage, to speak about certain issues in public. And the way to do that means that I have to have friends that I can learn this with, because some people are not receptive to these ideas. And some people are not comfortable with ideas that maybe haven't been shared before. And I've been treading into territory that is new to me, teaching inside of a Beit Midrash. And all I can say is thank you very much for being with me on this journey. B'ezrat Hashem, we have one more shiur together next week in the writings of Rabbi Yitzchak, Isaac, HaLevi, Herzog. But until then, I wish you a wonderful evening. B'ezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week, and then we'll regroup together for a whole nother winter semester right after the holidays. B'ezrat Hashem. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to stick around. For those of you who need to go, I wish you a laila tov, a good night. Thank you so much for learning Torah with me.